Growing up with a mother with schizophrenia was like being on an emotional roller coaster that I couldn't get off of. My mother was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia when I was 4 years old. And that first decade was really tough because she was in and out of the hospital and I just never knew what to expect. When she was on her medicine, things were good between us. We were close and she was definitely very involved in my life. But when she stopped taking her medicine, she would get very distant. She'd get paranoid and cut people off. She would spend so much time in her own mind. It was like she was in her own world. It was a world that I wasn't invited into. Schizophrenia stole my mother from me. And that was really hard as a child to watch my mom turn into a completely different person. So her illness was really frightening for me because I just didn't understand it. When my mother got sick, she stopped taking care of me as well as herself, so I had to take care of her. I became a child caregiver at a very young age, which meant I had to grow up really quickly. This was definitely the case when I was in the 7th grade. My mother and I were living together alone for the first time in many years, and I was really happy to live with my mom because I felt like a normal girl again, and it was really good those first few months. We did all kind of fun stuff together. But then she stopped taking her medicine, and slowly but surely she started getting more distant. She got very paranoid, started cutting people out. I remember I would come home from school and she would have all these papers spread out on the table and she would just be writing, and she was just so in her own world. And I had to take care of all the details in this world. I would do all the cooking, all the cleaning. I had to make sure that we were okay. Essentially, I took on the role of being the parent. Part of that role was to protect my mom. When people would call to see what was going on, I would try to act like things weren't as bad as they were because I didn't want her to have to go to the hospital. I always feared that maybe she wouldn't come home from there. I thought that I could save her from schizophrenia, and the fact that I didn't was really hard for me. Being a caregiver at such a young age was really difficult for me because I was overly responsible. I didn't play enough. I didn't laugh enough. I wasn't a child in a lot of ways. What I did do a lot of was worry. I worried about my mom. I also worried about what the other kids would say if they found out about my mom having mental illness. So I became hyper secretive about my mother's illness as well as about the toll that it took on me. There were times when I felt like I carried the weight of the world. But I was just so used to carrying it because I always felt like I had to be so strong. I couldn't afford to break down because my mom was, and someone had to hold things together. I got really used to putting my emotional needs on the back burner. There just didn't seem like there was space for them. And that's a dangerous thing because when I was constantly throwing my emotional baggage into the closet, it doesn't go anywhere. What I've come to realize is that my mother wasn't the only one who was emotionally and psychologically traumatized by her illness. I was too. My family played a major support for me in my life, and they really helped me to cope with my childhood. I'm so thankful to my family because they really were there for my mom and I. If it weren't for them, I don't think that my mother and I would be as close as we are now. I lived with my grandparents until I was in the 6th grade. And my mother would live with them as well when she was out of the hospital. My grandmother did everything for me until about the 3rd grade when she passed away. And in many ways, she shielded me from the effects of my mother's illness. When she passed away, I became very close to my grandfather. He was like my rock. He was always someone that I could count on. And I really needed that sense of stability in my life. And it really helped me to cope with some of the things I was going through with my mom. My aunts and uncles were also really important to me as well, and they helped me to have a solid foundation. I co-authored a memoir with my mother titled Love's All That Makes Sense. I decided to share my story because so little is written from the perspective of children with parents with a severe mental illness. These children are often known as silent sufferers because so often they're overlooked by the mental health community. I wanted to give voice to my experiences to raise awareness about these hidden children and also their need for more support. I have to be honest, it wasn't the easiest thing for me to share my story. With all of the stigma around mental illness, I became very secretive about my mom's experience as well as about my own. I really had to dig deep to find the courage. And what inspired me was my mom, actually. About 5 years ago, she started giving speeches for NAMI. NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. It's a nonprofit organization that helps people with mental illness as well as their families. It has been an organization that has done so much for my mother. If it wasn't for NAMI, I'm not sure where my mom would be today. They have really been there for her and so many other people in her situation, as well as family caregivers as well. And she would go through the community talking about what it was like for her to live with mental illness. And as I watched her, just finding that courage inside of her really helped me to find the courage in myself so that I too could share my own story. Writing the book helped me to heal because I was finally able to release the hold that the past had on me. For so long, the painful parts of my childhood, I was carrying them around. They were like this elephant in the middle of the room. And I had spent so much of my life trying to squeeze around this elephant, but it takes up a lot of space. So working on the book was really liberating for me because I was able to let so much of that emotional baggage go. But it was definitely a process. For me, that process started when I was finally willing to stop running from my past, as well as to stop denying just some of the things that really hurt me from that time. It was hard for me because for a while I really feared going into those dark places in myself because I wasn't sure if I could handle the emotions that came up. I was really glad that I had tools like yoga and qigong because it helped me to look at that shadow side of myself with more love as well as more compassion. And through this process, I was finally able to own my story. I could finally feel those things that I was afraid to feel. I could mourn for that little girl that was sad and hurt. And in doing this, I really began to see that sometimes you have to go into the dark in order to find the light. When I went back and looked at my past, I saw that there were so many beautiful things there. There were a lot of gifts that I got out of my childhood, like learning how to be really strong or really learning how to focus. Those things have served me so well in my life. I also saw a lot of love that was there for me. And as I look back, it really helped me to reframe my story. And I realized that it was simply that, a story. My childhood story does not have to define my whole life. I get to choose. I can tell a new story. If people were to walk away from the book with one message, it's that love and hope can see you through some of the most difficult times. There were times for my mother and I when our world was just turned on its head, and the only thing that made sense for us was love. The love that my mother and I had for each other, the love that our family had for us. It really held us together. Sometimes love is all that you have, and a lot of times it's all you really need.